What is up, fellow hosts and humans? Welcome back to a brand new Westworld Season 4, Episode 6, titled Fidelity Breakdown, Recap, and Review. And this episode I thoroughly enjoyed, all while we got some advancements, if you will, in terms of the human resistance storyline. It was also a little bit of a self-contained story in that of the humanity that was still shining through Caleb. As you guys can probably tell through previous breakdowns, I'm a big fan of Aaron Paul, and this episode is exactly why. And, you know, I love the episode title, Fidelity, because, you know, you couldn't prove better fidelity in a host likened to that of the 278th version of, you know, this Caleb and all the other previous versions we meet throughout, because the fidelity of that of Caleb is exactly, I would say, the personification of humanity, even bursting through a copy version of himself. Can't wait to see what theories you have. We'll compare notes as usual at the very end. Don't worry, I'll stick to the end. I'll be going over some of the glimpses the promo for next episode gives us. But before we get to all of that, I would really appreciate a like. I really appreciate the Westworld support on the videos. It's fantastic seeing so many of you comment and share your theories and ideas and everything like that. So this episode picked up with a young Frankie. This is 23 years ago. You know, Frankie's still the young age she was at. This is after when we saw her and her mother Yuade escape. We can see that even Frankie was involved in these missions to extract outliers from in the heart of the city, even just as it began. Even back then, they came in there with a guy who controlled the little surveillance system. They've had it this whole time because we learned from Jay last episode that they captured a drone and it basically allowed them to identify whenever there was an outlier through that other breach. So that's who they were speaking to, funnily enough, this episode. It was a younger version of Jay. One thing I really liked about all of this as well, even from this part before the Caleb aspects of the episode, it was a very, I don't know if I want to quite label it horror, so to speak, but thrillery-esque vibe with just all of these little aspects it gets into. Because one thing I was saying in the previous episode, even like that of the tower, to when all of the humans just stop because of the sounds being played out, it has this very creepy, eerie undertone that I feel like they're just executing extremely well this season, because it is this really weird, unnerving dystopian setting with what Halores has achieved. Unfortunately, though, surveillance guy gets grabbed by a drone. Frankie and her mom make their escape to a safe house where they have other outliers there. So that's when we cut to 23 years later. We pick up with Frankie again, and we're going to talk about this part of the storyline for quite a while before we visit the Caleb stuff. And this is where they're all headed to their current base that they work out. We have some more prophet lines from Bernard saying, "I never quite know what you will do next, but the place you're taking me to, yes, I know the place." And that is because this park is none other than Temperance, which is the very park that Caleb and Maeve went to 23 years ago, right before the dig site, obviously the new park that William opened. But now you can see it's like quite old. It was just kind of abandoned. Halores obviously achieved what she wanted to achieve, so it's just, you know, allowed nature to grow over that fresh, clean look it had of the old kind of roaring 20s. And they needed to go there to get a tool to repair Maeve. But not only that, to be fair, they needed to replace her host control unit, because as Bernard mentions, repairing her body is simple enough, but a long time underground would have completely corrupted her host control unit. So you kind of need to do a hard drive transfer to a new hard drive, one that's nice, fresh and clean, not the one that's been in your PC for like the last 10 to 12 years. Well, technically 23 years here. We also had some conversations between Bernard and Frankie with regards to how they upgraded collecting data from the guests. It used to be the hats, but then they appealed to humanity's vanity, and it was the mirrors. Through showing Frankie behind the mirror, it basically scanned her, and it produced a decent demonstration of how there was like a neural mapping of Frankie now. But this is when they had another problem on their hands. Their team was coming back from the city, the team led by Jay. Stubbs was there. Obviously, they extracted that woman that William was meant to take out. A lot of you commented on my previous video, and I don't think I even mentioned this in my video, that in the stairway, you believed something happened with Jay in terms of him getting taken over or whatever, and you guys were right. And obviously, Jay was copied. My only potential, I say potential because sometimes in the moment when I'm making these videos, I might not think as in-depth as I'd like to think sometimes I am, but I want to know how they would have copied him so fast and produced him Does that mean they had intel on him beforehand to produce him, put him in that stairway before he even got there? It's those kind of questions that lead to a little bit of contrivance in writing. But again, I don't want to be fully convicted in saying that, because maybe one of you are going to reply a very decent excuse as to how they planted and copied the neural mapping of Jay, or even if it wasn't the neural mapping, the likeness of him. I don't know how they did that, because he seemed to be pretty remote and away from the city, unless he's going in there to save an outlier. So how did they do that? But I liked how the episode wanted to play around a little bit with regards to Frankie's girlfriend, or it could have been any one of them. There was some very obvious, reveals there when he's like asking for where the host control unit is. I wonder why he's so concerned about that. This is when we have Frankie shoot Bernard, that they get tied down to that chair. Obviously, her main priority, as she says herself, is finding out what happened to her father. I think right now in this moment, what Frankie did was genuine. She did, think that maybe there was something ulterior going on, but at the same time, I like the struggle portrayed in the actor behind the role, Aurora, because clearly she's so close to maybe finding out what's going on here. Hey, there is Maeve. I remember my father with her. Yet she's also in a world like this. You can't help but be extremely apprehensive when two people just walk along. You don't have the context as to how Bernard is a prophet. I did also find it quite interesting in how Bernard revealed that Stubbs was sometimes the imposter, which was also almost sad. I was like, imagine if it was Stubbs and he was just killed back in the park. But either way, let's pause this and now talk about the astonishing Caleb scenes this episode. Again, like I thoroughly enjoyed this. I think I'm very biased because I think Aaron Paul is an insanely incredible actor. But I just also genuinely, as objective as I can be here, really like the story they were telling with, as somewhat Lisa Joy got into. She said in the behind the scenes of this episode, I still think that despite the fact that he's had the Delos treatment and is now a replica of his former self, that there's so much humanity in him, even though it's illogical. He doesn't stop fighting because he's fighting for something bigger than himself. He's fighting for his daughter. So in a kind of like a whimsical, like, story way, that's what I liked most about this, the perseverance of the 278th Caleb. But that's a disservice of a statement from me, because you also had these little, I don't know, rusty Calebs along the way who are, sacrificing themselves. So Dolores wakes Caleb up, and she's immediately, one thing I really like about Tessa Thompson's acting here as Dolores is she's just really finding, like, humanity. Like, some people view bugs just, like, incessantly irritating. She's like, your daughter, your daughter, your daughter. And this impatience grows throughout the episode, as it's been growing every episode. But one thing I did like on how they touched on here is that she did say, you're not the only one who has lost someone, Caleb. And she did get emotional in that moment. So I think that could be a callback to Charlotte Hale's family, of which this Dolores Hale, if you will, really struggled with that. And as soon as she went through that trauma, she just kind of stripped her own skin and became a lot more inhumane, so to speak. Whereas there was once a little bit of a chance for her back then. All of this, as we know, is due to this very big effort and undertaking by Dolores to figure out this outlier problem. She says, unlike yours, my kind is perfect. Perfectly immortal, perfectly rational, yet they're making irrational choices. Choosing mortality, staining themselves with death. How are you making them do that? It's this problem she can't solve, and it is driving her insane. And the reason why she's so fascinated with Caleb is because in the shared control room of the dig site 23 years ago, he did literally resist shooting Maeve, and he shot William, or should I say the host in black, and she was just like, how did you defy me? And I've got a feeling that maybe Caleb doesn't know exactly what it is, and if there is ever a dialogue or a sentence reveal, so to speak, it might just be like, I have humanity, bitch, kind of thing. I don't know. I don't think it's going to be as elaborate as maybe some people are theory crafting about, as we kind of get into the ending of all of this, when we have that final confrontation with Dolores and Caleb. I think it is essentially the hosts, as what we were kind of talking about last episode with regards to how we had Dolores show the host in black, the host who went out and killed the homeless outlier, and how there's a bit of empathy and she lowered her gun. I genuinely don't think that they're enjoying living in this world the way that Dolores has created it, but she can't quite fathom that. The thing is, it's even happening to the host in black. He had that empathy when we had that outlier extracted last episode who rested her head on his shoulders, and he just closed his eyes. Despite being this evolved kind, this perfected kind now 23 years later, even the host in black felt some compassion there. Like, ultimately, the outcome being, even though humans enslaved us and created us to be these incredibly, basically sentient hosts, and you did terrible things to us, even though we have the opportunity to do that to you and currently are basically doing that to you, we're not really cool with doing it. Maybe the cycle should just end. It really does come down to how she has not really got much of herself left, and maybe the other hosts do and want that for themselves. Now, one thing that really intrigued me is when Halores said to Caleb, the body I brought your mind back in is temporary. It's already failing. I doubt you have more than a couple of more increasingly painful days left. Maybe this is deliberate, maybe it's to do with the experimentation, because throughout this episode, you could argue, why didn't they do cleanup of the previous bodies? But all of them were left there deliberately because she wants, for example, in this case of Caleb, to get the furthest to maybe, hopefully, in this experiment, this effort, see the rat, so to speak, go and navigate its way throughout the maze to see if it can find the other end. And, you know, the scientists write down their evidence and their findings. That's why the other Calebs were left there, and probably she wanted to keep rinsing and repeating the experiment through having shorter temporary life bodies, so to speak, in an effort to find that answer. Whereas if you just build the body in a host body that is permanent, like the host in black, maybe she would just feel like that's a waste of resources because she might just want to start again with a new copy. May as well just build the foundation on a temporary basis than, you know, build a permanent one. Which does make me think now, if the 279th version we have at the end of the episode gets out and ever visits the others, the last couple of episodes which we have from this moment onward could be over the course of a day or two, which makes me think, and I'm just throwing this theory in here, that maybe Caleb might get out and basically, even if he does reunite with Maeve and Frankie, he might not last too long, and it could be, again, in a somewhat predictable way, dying in the arms kind of thing, but saying one nice last whimsical line kind of thing to your daughter, and then he croaks, so to speak. But it would be wholesome. And this is where things get creepy, as I was saying earlier, and it's just so interesting to watch unfold. He sees the other versions of Caleb in their own cells, and one thing I found sweet every single time that the 278th Caleb was making his way throughout his journey, even with this first one, he tells himself he wants to comfort his other selves. The very first thing he always says is Frankie is alive. And there's something about that that kind of breaks my heart. He always just wants to tell them that your daughter's alive. Even though you're suffering and you're dying, I need to let you know at least that, so that there's some hope out there. And ironically enough, that's the thing that he ended up taking when we had the other Caleb point to the time. He opened the top of it and he found that, I guess that's like a little spike of hope drug. I don't know, something like the mood drugs in the previous season. This is where he passes out and we have the drone host looking over him, and the drone host clicks on the terminate build button, and this is where Caleb has to, you know, panic and basically find the hatch that allows him to escape. And there's even a little engraved marking there that you have to assume has been left behind from the previous Calebs. You could argue that it's been left there from the drone host or Halores herself, because they do kind of weld over it at the end of the episode. But then again, it's probably more believable that they just left it there from a previous host because they wanted this host, again, with an analogy to the rat in the maze, to navigate its way through the previous clues of the previous copies to get to the end, and hopefully for them to find an answer to their outlier problem. And this is where things just got more and more intriguing. You know, we saw Caleb drop into a pit of, you know, there was a couple of dead bodies there, but largely it was ash from all of the previous couple of 100+ versions who didn't quite make it down there maybe, so they just sweep the ash down that little circular hatch, because I think the way they're thinking about it is, okay, we'll just start again and, you know, build another one. So they burn, sweep him down there. But if he happens to escape, then fair enough, we'll let him go on and see if that yields any answers. But it doesn't matter either way to Halores or these drone hosts. They're just still gonna try and find the answer with a new one or not. And hey, if one does make it down there, like this 278 version did, and the other previous versions we meet along the way, then Cool, let's see how those results go. This is even why when Caleb gets to the point of where the interview room was, when Halores wakes up the brand new copy, there's even initially an ash print on the wall because Caleb's hand had ash on it. Previous versions of him went through the exact same thing. They don't even bother to clean that up because, again, if they find one who happens to make it a little bit further, then fair enough. In the meantime, as we saw, they're already building the 279th version. They're not really wasting any time. There's almost like two experiments going on. One with Caleb escaping, but they're already on to building the next copy, who we see at the very end of the episode. This is when we have a little bit of a battle between Caleb and a drone host, and he eventually finds a bloody handprint on the ceiling, meaning that the previous copies of him have achieved killing a drone host as well. But this is when it cuts to Halores. We have Clementine basically updating her saying he's still on the run but won't get far. This is where we see more of that frustration. These humans, their petty defiances, everything they do is so small, it's exhausting. And I liked how she started almost with her agitation. She wants to see others' frustration with humans as well, because then she might feel like she's not so alone with viewing them as these insects. But she's getting a bit almost frustrated at Clementine here, because she's like, you spend your days in the city, don't you? She's like, I do. And she says, do they ever get under your skin? And she says, well, I don't get close to the outliers, I prefer the sheep. But she didn't really give her the answer she was looking for, because low-key, Clementine probably likes going amongst them. That's the whole problem. She wants them all to transcend. We've seen some transcend last episode, but most of them like living in the park with the people. So she says, I'd like to put an end to this. There's a clue to this with regards to in the promo we'll get to at the end of this breakdown, but don't worry, I'm not going to talk about it now. Now, this is where we see Caleb come across a host version of himself right by the vent exit, and there's a fall that would arguably maybe, break your ankle or your legs or whatever. And just as he's hyping himself up to jump out, the other version of him says, don't use me instead. That really broke my heart in a way, because this one obviously has got to a point of his body failing, so he couldn't continue on for too long. But again, the first thing Caleb tells this other version of him, this previous build of him, is that Frankie is alive. And it's just, I don't know, a recurring line that he keeps saying that just I found very sweet. And so Caleb uses him to break his fall. He makes his way towards the exit, but before that happens, he falls down. We have more visions of him, of which I haven't really spoken about too much in the episode so far, of him walking with Frankie, and she falls over, hurts her knee, and there was this nice line that kind of ties back to his perseverance, so to speak. What kind of person can't be beat? The kind that doesn't give up. And it's through this version of himself really not giving up, despite the other versions not giving up as well and going as far as they could, so to speak, before their bodies were kind of shutting down. He is the one who made it to that radio broadcast. And so Caleb gets back up, he bursts out, he's on the roof of, I believe, Olympiad Entertainment, where we have Christina working, and you can see the cityscape in the background, the tower, and he plugs the power in, and he manages to send a message on the same frequency to what his daughter Frankie would pick up, saying, it's your dad, I know you're out there, if you're hearing this, I want you to know that you're going to win, encouraging her, supporting her, but now it has to be you. But again, I feel fairly confident that this copy will reunite with Frankie. Again, I am wondering though, is it going to be as sentimental though, knowing that it's not the exact Caleb, even though it is a literal neural copy of that mind? So effectively, if we had that technology, if I did that to myself, the other version of me would, for all intents and purposes, be thinking like me. So it could be as sentimental, but I'm still holding out hope for my boy Caleb, being wound up there, like the actual Man in Black is. But it might just end with the copy dying. But I want Aaron Paul to continue. He has to continue into maybe the 5th and final season. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we are nearing the end now. We have Jay come in. Frankie's having a drink in the corner, and he starts to walk towards Maeve, just in case it wasn't obvious enough. You're like my family, see? You're like a sister to me, obviously. And I thought as soon as we heard that, it's a nice parallel to the beginning when they were younger, and he was like, you're not my sister. This led up to a point of where she smashes a bottle over his head, and they start a little bit of a fight. And this is where the message is coming through. And this was so annoying because there was only a few words transmitted before Jay shot the freaking radio. I hope that somehow they can replay the whole message, but maybe not. But it was nice that she got to hear her father's voice. And then, lo and behold, Maeve comes from behind and kills Jay. This then briefly cuts back to Halores and Caleb saying such a disappointment. Again, in the rat in the maze analogy, she let him carry on doing all of this in an effort to hope that this opportunity with how far this Caleb got, as she details, farther than any other of the 277 before him have got. But no, disappointing results. And she says that all you did was waste your shot on a worthless apology. You think a few words will make up for the choices you made all those years ago. He says it doesn't matter. And what I loved about this moment, again, on top of Aaron Paul's performance, is the complete flipping off to Halores. Like, in the face of everything, she is taking the biggest L in this moment. Like, not only have you not got your result, screw you, I've sent the message out there. Number 3, you don't have any more answers. It was constant L after L. And I love how there were some lines that basically mimic what Caleb said back to Liam Dempsey Jr., I believe, last season. If you remember on the train, he said something like, I'd rather live in a world of chaos than in one controlled by you. And in this moment, Caleb says a similar line by saying, we didn't infect your host. Dolores replies, you don't say. Then who did? You. Your hosts would rather die than live in your world. And I was just like, yes, yes. They're not infected. They're just trying to get away from you. And that's where I think she basically suspects that this could be the truth, because obviously there's already the insecurity out there that the hosts are enjoying humanity, whereas she just views them as filthy insects. Why are they enjoying it? Why don't they want to evolve? Some are transcending / evolving, but the majority, even Clementine, isn't. So she snaps his neck, and poor Caleb is down, but it doesn't really matter. We've got another one now, the 279th. This is where we cut back to Maeve and Frankie, and she more or less says, everything you guys did, that's why we're here. And Maeve says, well then, let's finish what we started. So I'm guessing, I don't know what they're going to do other than maybe some brief, but these are some basic speculations. Are they going to put demolition charges on the tower? That would be one way to kind of wipe out the signals being sent out to people. And then we just have Halores looking at Caleb and says, Caleb, wake up. And it's like rinse and repeat, baby. So as I said, guys, as from like a critical standpoint, I really enjoyed the narrative of this episode. One of the things we enjoy most about Westworld, and why a lot of people really enjoy this season as much as, well, not as much maybe, but a lot like season 1, is because one thing I'm seeing people say is that it's going back to the roots of consciousness, you know, your will, humanity and whatnot. And this very much so emphasized and focused in a concentrated dose of that in Caleb's self-contained storyline. So just before we get into the promo, let me know your ideas, your theories down in the comments below, everything you thought of this episode, where you think it's going to go in the next episode. I love reading every single one of your comments. You guys have been commenting and liking the videos a lot more, so thank you for that. So for those of you who aren't watching the promo, would appreciate another like, some more comments. Again, love reading them. But let's now get into the promo very briefly. So we hear throughout the whole promo Halores saying as follows: this may come as a shock to some of you, but in time, I think you'll understand. This is the final day for our kind. It's time for us to evolve into the species we're meant to become. So essentially, she is forcing the transcending, what we saw in the last episode where we had that drone host remove the human shell and the host control unit and put it into that little kind of armless, futuristic, robot-y looking kind of statue. As soon as they're put in there, it glows up, and it's, I don't know if she's built their own sublime or whatever her evolution is, whatever transcending from the human side of being a host, you turn into that. So she's now forcing this on her kind. So this is where, you know, I think there could be some kind of resistance out there from some of them saying, you know what, no, I don't want to transcend. I'm dying to know what the transcending is though, because it's like, well, if you're just becoming a little freaking lamppost, you know, looking robot and you're just stuck there, what are you going to become? Like, how do you therefore dominate humans? I don't know. Let me know your ideas. I guess they might create their own sublime, and that's why Halores, you know, if we go back to the beginning, and this has been forgotten for a while, if you remember, they wanted access through a lot of the cartel leaders storing the data of the sublime, which they don't have the key to. They wanted that, but they can't enter it, so maybe they've created their own one. That's the only thing I can think of for now that Halores would view as an evolution, because the evolution that we have seen hosts go through is through what Akacheta has. They've created worlds and ultimate worlds. They've got their own worlds they're in charge of. That would be an evolution, so you have to think that's what Halores is after, and is wanting to force upon people now. We see Christina and Teddy in the city, and it looks like all hell is breaking loose. Maybe some of these people are hosts as well. And we have Halores hold her hands up. By the way, as you can tell, this ends in a bit of a cat fight, so to speak, because she charges at Maeve. So evidently Maeve makes her way to the top of that location, and it looks like they are fighting in the transcending room. Now, this is very fascinating. Here we see Caleb out there amongst the chaos of this city, like wearing a coat. Now, could Maeve have gone up there like we see her fighting Halores, and she let Caleb go down to his daughter? Because guess what? We see Frankie and Stubbs there in the crowd, and it seems to be the same location as to where we see Caleb kind of wide-eyed reacting to something. So you can bet your ass they're going to reunite around this part in the episode. And again, the thing I'm fascinated most with is the outcome of this. Is he just going to die within 48 hours? The body's going to fail, so it's going to end in like a cliche kind of sad, wholesome way. Or even though he dies, there is still a living, cryogenically stasis version of him, like that of the real William Man in Black. I think that is, unfortunately, a reach, and this could be the last season for Aaron Paul. And it could just be, as he kind of said in that voicemail kind of radio message, it's down to you now. Even though he's got a couple of days left with the 279th version, it might just all ultimately come to an end, just with a loving departure. But ladies and gentlemen, that's more or less everything I have to say about the promo as well as the episode. So I really hope you enjoyed this breakdown, this recap, and overall review. Let me know what you thought of the episode as always, and obviously your theories. Like the video if you did enjoy it. It really massively helps me out, so thank you if you're one of the people who did that. Check out some of my links down in the description below if you want to follow me a bit more on Twitter. I have a Discord server where you can talk to me there. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you fellow hosts and humans in the next video. Goodbye.